Hey, everybody. You might remember a few episodes back, I interviewed the great Stephan Kinsella, one of the smartest people I know. Um, he is a lawyer, a patent attorney, also an anti intellectual property advocate who has written on libertarian legal theory, a bunch of property rights stuff, and economics as well. Just an all around smarty-pants. That's a great episode. You should go back and watch it if you haven't already. But anyway, I have him on today to talk about school choice because I wrote in my Substack an article praising school choice, and he took issue with that when I asked him what he thought. And so I said, "Hey, buddy, get on here and let's talk about it." And he did, and it's a great conversation, and you might be surprised by what happened. So enjoy.
Haman Nature, a journey in search of a peaceful and prosperous society with human nature as a guide. Led by your host, Adam Haman.
Stephan, welcome back to my little show.
Thank you, Adam.
So, ladies and gentlemen, we're recording on my birthday. And for my birthday,
Happy birthday!
Thank you. One of my libertarian heroes is going to call me a socialist. So go ahead, Stephan, call me a goddamn socialist.
Well, let's define socialism first. It's the institutionalized aggression against private property.
Yeah.
Which is what you get from educational welfare.
It's true. And I am guilty. A couple of days ago, I wrote a little article on my Substack that I will link to. And although I made eminently clear that I think the libertarian position on school and state is that they must be separated at all costs, about a half a second before we abolish the state entirely, I also argued that we should support school choice measures, such as the vouchers that Milton Friedman used to talk about, but the modern day equivalent is called a educational savings account of the type that are instituted in Arizona recently, and was proposed here in Nevada back in 2015, but the real socialists got that struck down. So I wrote that, and you read that, and then you reached out and called me names.
I think you prodded me. I think you prodded me and you said, "Any thoughts?" I'm like, well.
I don't think we need to put in all the relevant history. You called me names.
Okay, so I have a few thoughts on how to approach this. Let me kind of tell you my approach to this and my history on this. So when I was in college, I was a minarchist, of course, but I saw some appeal to Milton Friedman's negative income tax and his voucher idea, just because economically you can see the rough argument, right? Like if you're going to have a government program, make it more efficient, something like that, right?
Sure.
In rough terms. And I think I even wrote an article for my college paper in favor of vouchers, school choice vouchers. I changed my mind in the meantime. And then I had this debate with Corey DeAngelis at the Soho Forum like last year or 2 years ago or something. I think it was last year about this. I'm not viscerally against school choice because most of the people that dislike it are people that I hate, you know. The unions and the people that they make the wrong arguments, just like some people make bad arguments against immigration, like they're against immigration because it will lower wages or something. So like that's not, if there's a problem with immigration, that's not the problem with immigration, right? You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
And it's not the highest thing on my list, and I wouldn't be extremely upset if we get school choice, because I think it would have some positive upsides. But not as a libertarian. Like it wouldn't have any positive upsides for liberty, I don't think. It might have some positive upsides for the quality of public school education in one or two dimensions. And so I can see why some parents would want it, but I can also see why some old people would want Social Security benefits to be expanded. The question is there a libertarian reason to be in favor of this? Now, you mentioned, I think in your piece, like, well, we want to abolish taxes, but if we go from 30% to 10%, that's not ideal, but it's still an improvement, and we should favor that. And I agree with you on that, because that's an unambiguously good incremental improvement in libertarian terms, or liberty
Yeah, I made
terms.
an unfair analogy there. The
Well,
30% to 10% is a straight line, and what I'm talking about here with school
well,
choice
it's
is
not that
not
it's
a straight.
unfair. It's that the question is it a good analogy? Like, so the
Right.
question is, would moving from our current system, which is a mixed status system, mixed private system, would it be an unambiguous or a large improvement? So that's the question in liberty terms.
Right.
And so, and you also made another comment I'm not sure I agree with. You kind of said something like, well, one of the reasons that some people oppose school choice is that it would ensnare the private schools in the public funded net and give the state more excuse to regulate them. And your thing was, well, but they can regulate them anytime they want now anyway. So it's not really going to get any worse. But I don't, as an empirical matter, I really find that hard to believe, because
Oh,
I
I
think
do grant
worse.
that the risk is higher.
I think it's much higher. I think it's much, much, much higher. Imagine Oregon doing this.
Sure.
And do you think if you're going to give a voucher to I'm simplifying school choice by calling it vouchers. I know there's different mixtures of school choice.
The upgrade to ESA is a significant upgrade. So
educational savings account, I think, is a slightly different thing. It depends on who funds it. In some of the states, as I understand, the state gives you the money. It's like welfare. It's just expanding educational, or it's a type of educational welfare. If they let you use your own money in some tax advantaged account, I have no problem with that. But
sure. That's
or a tax credit. I have no problem with tax credits.
Well, I'm going to defend the sloppy version, which is the ESA, and that's just like a voucher, except it's an account that you can spend from. So it doesn't just have to be this one clunky ticket you hand to a private school or whatever. You can pay for all manner of
correct
education, curriculum, a tutor.
As I said, I can see reasons parents might like that. If the government gives me free money and I can spend it on lots of things, and the free market sort of pounces on that, yeah, I can see why they might want free money from the government to spend on their kids' education.
All right.
But what the question is, what's libertarian about that?
Sure. Well, I'm going to bolster my case and throw a few things at you just to see what you have to say about it. And some of these will be. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. But before we start, I was going to do let me just give you a few thoughts, and then you can take those into account when you grill me. Would you agree that if the state sends someone to prison for a victimless crime, that it doesn't really matter who owns the prison?
Sure. I don't think
whether
privatization
it's a
is
federal
meaningful.
prison or whether it's a privatized prison, right?
No, and I see the relationship you're drawing.
And
yes.
So when you call someone a government employee, like a teacher, that's just a classification the state came up with. There's no economic and politically realistic difference between the government using a contractor to do something. I mean, the government's still taxing people and paying people to do things, and they're always human beings just doing things that the government tells them to do with the money they're giving them. So there's no fundamental libertarian difference between a government employee and a contractor.
Oh, no, not at all.
So you see where I'm going. Where I'm going with this is that, so that means that one problem with, so the way I look at it is, right now we have educational welfare, which means about 90% of the country's parents and kids are on educational welfare, and about 10% refuse to take that welfare, and they send their kids to private schools.
Actually, the numbers would be higher than, I mean, the homeschool movement alone is over 10%. So
okay, it could be even higher. But the point is, whatever that percentage is, if you go to a complete, like a pure voucher system or even an ESA system, if it's fully funded, then you're going from 90%, 80% educational welfare to 100%. And you're effectively converting every parent who's a homeschooler and every private school, you're converting them into government contractors or into quasi-public schools. And to do this, there's no doubt in my mind that the government's going to say, well, you can't just spend it on your chicken coop. You got to spend it on a quote school that we define as a school, and you know what they're going to do. They're going to say, well,
we
for
know
the
what they might want to do, but
okay,
the facts on the ground are when you build a quote unquote private prison, you're doing it at exactly the specifications that the government directs, and
correct,
there's only one purchaser. It's a monopsony, so that is a very tight control system
correct. It's
between
not the
government.
same. I agree. It's not the same. It's not exactly
So
the
yeah,
same.
so you have to draw that distinction, and the way all these pieces of legislation are being passed right now, and granted it could change, but right now the thumb on the scale of the government to define what is and is not an educational expense is pretty light. And I'll just grant right off the
No,
bat that
no. And Corey made that point too in our debate. I will concede that it's possible that they may have a hands-off approach forever. Maybe it's fairly hands-off, and it wouldn't change that much. However, it would change a lot of things. It's going to have to change a lot of things. So one thing it would change is, I think tuition would go up, because just like college tuition is going up because of the guaranteed student loan subsidies, private schools are going to start charging more. So your average parent who was, I mean, I just think their tuition is going to go up. So that means the taxpayers. So you had this comment. What
I'm
if
going to
it
make
saves us?
I'm going to make the exact opposite argument. I think the
Okay.
increase in competition would make prices go down.
Well,
Because again, you can spend it. It's not just one voucher or something like that. You can spend it any way you want, almost. So I think the prices for each individual unit of education will go down, and parents would just add more of them. They'll add.
So how about this? So right now, why do 90% of parents send their kids to public schools? Because they can't afford private schools, right?
Actually, I think
Or they
it's
don't want to.
actually I think it's more inertia. I think
It-
culturally they think they have to.
It could be, but the point is, if you have 80% of the parents with their kids in public schools, and then you give them this bucket of money and you say you can spend it on whatever school you want, what do you think is going to happen to the demand for the good private schools that they're
Well,
not applying to right now? The
I
demand
can't
is going to
I
go
can't
up, right?
guess what markets do, but you see a vision where all of these parents flood private schools, and I'm guessing it wouldn't happen that way. I think you'd get an explosion of these homeschools, micro schools, pod associations, where people don't just reflexively send their kid to a brick building the way they did 200 years ago. I think things will be much, much. Oh, and online aspects of the curricula. I don't think it would just be. But who can say? That's what I think. You see a different vision.
Well,
But let me go through.
I could imagine the demand going up for some good private schools out in the
Sure,
suburbs
some.
that is not there now, and that, like, right now you have middle high income people move to these nice safe suburbs to send their kids to these let's say the good public schools in the suburbs, and now anyone can go there from out of the county. It's going to change the composition of these schools. The schools won't be able to discriminate, I don't think. I mean, I don't know how these programs are all being worked,
They're
but
all a little different, which also is a point in my favor. I mean, if we do get 50 different examples of how this can work, and they all have slightly different effects. But anyway, you asked why libertarians should want it,
right.
and I'm gonna run down a couple of pros for school choice, and some of these are things parents and kids want, and some of the are things libertarians want. So take them as they come. My first one is that it saves kids in two very real ways. You're familiar with Michael Malice's quote that public schools are literal prisons for children, and the only time most people will ever encounter violence in their lifetimes. I don't know what schools were like when you went to school, but they were kind of violent when I went, and I think they're like 10x worse now. And so you can immediately free a whole subset of these children from having or feeling like they have to go to these schools.
Okay,
And then
but I thought you were earlier saying that they wouldn't flee to the private schools because
I don't think they'll flee to the private schools. I think they'll flee away from the public schools. Again, I see online and home schools and micro schools as being the biggest part of the market response to this sort of freedom.
Okay, I see. I'm skeptical of that. That seems like a bug out bag niche.
When I talk to parents around me, that's exactly their vision.
I don't know a single normal person that would do that. They either go to public schools or private schools. They would not be homeschooling people with buns in their hair and raising chickens in the backyard.
Well, I don't think they all have to look like that. Remember, you're going to see a lot of freedom in the inner city too. There's no chicken coops there, but we can disagree about what the market would provide.
Okay.
But I see people reflexively reaching for things that aren't little uniformed, again, private school, brick building. I don't think people want that. But the second thing we free kids from is this incredible, I don't know if you've noticed, my good man, but there's a little bit of an indoctrination program going on in public schools these days, and it's not
okay.
good.
That's actually, I see where you go. That's actually one fair point. I'm gonna consider giving you a point on that one.
Okay.
Yeah, if you have a homeschool thing, the indoctrination would be way less. I agree. I just don't think the homeschool thing is going to be. I think it's going to be a flocking to the private schools, and they're almost as indoctrinated as the public schools. So that's kind of the way I look at it.
Understood. And I can see why they would give you a different intuition, but we can't say, so let's put a pin in that.
Okay.
I'm going to throw more adjectives at that point. The propaganda is woke, sexist, racist, civilizationally destroying, in my view. And I mean, I don't know if you've seen the same rage porn videos that I've seen, but for a long period of time now, they've been teaching little white heterosexual boys like you and I were that we're literally sinful by nature, with the original sin of our racist skin and colonization and toxic masculinity, which isn't, defined the way you and me and John Wayne and Clint Eastwood would define it. They're literally saying that anytime you want to achieve something as your nature, it's bad. They're egalitarian. And I think it's just criminal to leave kids in a situation like that when there's something to be done. So we get those two benefits right away.
Okay.
I think that government expenditure on education goes down a little bit immediately when you pass these things. And then as people flee away from the public schools, even though the teachers unions and the bureaucrats wouldn't want to, eventually they're going to have to close these empty schools, or at least shrink them. And that's a libertarian good. As student enrollment in public schools declines, one of the most evil political forces in our country, the teachers unions, becomes that much less politically powerful.
All right, that's another point in your favor. I think unless an equivalent rises up to now govern the private schools too, which is like
that would be a horrible. Yeah, I agree.
Let me ask you, let's do the math though on your last point, just real quick. Let's talk about that. When you're just kind of like dashing out there that you think the overall government expenditure would go down, and if it would, I would concede that's another point, a libertarian point in this favor. But I think you would concede that the number of students receiving educational welfare would increase.
Yes.
Okay. So what you're assuming is that the average price per student would go down, the subsidy, and down enough to counterbalance the extra 20% of people now receiving educational welfare.
Yes.
So you're assuming 25% savings, which means that the ESA.
It's hard to figure out the numbers because everybody counts incorrectly. But when you look at the amount spent in each state per student now, prior to ESAs, and then what the ESAs, the dollar amount of them, it's somewhere between half and like 60% of what these.
Right. So, but that's the point. So I think I've heard some of these ESAs. Let's just take a number. Let's say a given state spends $24,000 or $18,000 or whatever it is per high school student or whatever it is every year, and they're gonna say, well, we're gonna give everyone a $12,000 ESA grant, and so then the state will save money because it's less than what we're paying now, and the parents will surely be able to educate their kids for that because they're more efficient somehow than the public schools are, right? I guess that's the rough idea, right?
The numbers in Nevada are around 11,000,
Okay.
and the ESAs as proposed were something like 6,500 to 7,000, something like that.
Okay, so it's about half or something like that, right? 60%, something like that.
And then if I'm right, and people flee the public schools because they're just nightmares, I think you get even bigger effects, because I think you'll agree that with socialism, you get this enormous expensive bureaucracy.
Correct.
And I think that would just have to implode. All those
Right.
layers would just have to collapse, as the students just weren't there to support it.
And those are fair points, but here's the thing. Here's how I'm envisioning the problems with this. Like the libertarian ideal would be if we're using this as a transition mechanism, instead of like the Milton Friedman idea that like this is just a slightly more efficient way of doing welfare, right? Or like the negative income tax. If it's a transition mechanism, then you and I would say our goal is zero subsidies, right? Right now we're at 18,000, or what'd you say it was? 12,000, 11,000?
11 in Nevada, but it's all over the map.
Okay, so let's say 11 in Nevada. And so instead of doing 11 per kid for 80% of the kids, we're going to do 6,500 per kid for 100% of the kids. And on net, that's still a savings. And then maybe every year we can lower it by 10% until we get down to zero, right? So that would be a good transition plan.
That's true. I would never call this a transition plan. I don't think we have one of those.
No, but what I'm saying is it would be an improvement right away, but it would also, you could see that it could lead incrementally over time to better results every year if you wanted to reduce that subsidy. But of course,
if you tried to straight line it just reduce the amount the government spent per kid.
Yeah.
You would miss out on the market forces that are going to be activated with school choice. The government doesn't innovate. The government doesn't lower costs. Markets do that.
Okay, well, that's a point not in your favor then, because that means we're just transitioning from one system to the other to slightly reduce its harm on the kids, but it's going to be
not
here forever
slightly,
then.
not slightly. And it brings me to my next point, which I think is a home run. You asked why parents send their kids to public school. I said I think it's reflexive.
Yeah,
the governments have run the schools for over 100 years, right? We've lived in this culture where it's just expected that education is such an incredible public good. It's so obvious to everybody that it has to be provided by government. If you institute these ESAs, you're going to be instilling a culture where people see, oh, what was I thinking? The government doesn't have to provide education. Look, these people provide it. These teachers and these curriculum providers and blah, 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 blah. And I think that's a huge cultural shift that has all manner of knock-on effects, and all of them are in a direction towards liberty and away from statism.
I think I might agree with your beginning point and your end point, but not the middle part of the reasoning. So in other words, I don't think it's because of inertia. I think what's happened is this. Two things. The government impoverishes everyone with taxes and regulations and inflation. So most people can't afford private schools anymore.
Right.
And the government subsidizes public schools, and so people naturally use it. And that means that public schools tend to dominate. So if you live in a given area in America, you're likely surrounded by free public schools. That's just what happens when you subsidize something. And so naturally you're going to go there because that's what's available. I mean, there's probably not even a good private school near you. And even if there was, you couldn't afford it for the other reason. So I think they do it for that reason. So I could see what you're talking about breaking this too. And I am less opposed to the ESA model than to other models. But in any case, go ahead, proceed. You're making some good points, damn you.
Thank you. I've neared the end. I just
you're making me a socialist, Adam.
Welcome to the club. Welcome to the club. Wear the red pin. The only other thing I wanted to add is that we've already seen an incredible amount of innovation in the school choice arena. especially as the internet has come online.
Yeah.
Homeschooling, online, microkids, whatever
Yeah.
these pods are.
Thanks to the COVID lockdowns. That's one good thing that came from COVID lockdowns, right?
And like a lot of good things kind of did. I mean, the
Yeah.
trust in the experts, quote unquote, for
True.
instance. I mean,
And doctors and vaccines. I mean,
yeah.
I didn't get my flu shot this year, I'll tell you that.
Yeah, I mean, there's something about the state taking the iron fist out of the velvet glove, and people start to wake up. So anyway, yeah, as I mentioned earlier, homeschooling in general went from like 5 to 10% immediately just because of the COVID stuff, and I think it's still climbing. And technologically and systems-wise, the market is providing educational things, and it's just in its embryonic stage. As you know, it's a brand new market for all intents and purposes. And I think that's just only going to become more vibrant and more in-depth, which is why, again, I think you're going to see people not only fleeing the crappy government schools, but also their free private clones. The
Right.
the hooty tooty private schools that everybody wants to send their kid to. I think it's going to be something much more flexible and dynamic that the market will prefer, that really emphasizes the specific value systems of the parents involved. I think it's going to be really decentralized, and I think that's good.
So that's what's interesting about this disagreement, is because a lot of these disagreements depend upon predictions about what's going to happen.
Yeah.
I guess you could say, let the free market reign, let's see, but it's not a free market, really.
No, it isn't. Admittedly.
Maybe a couple states could try it. We'll learn from them. So I think that people, if you do this, they're going to want to go to private schools. And then, so instead of this possible reducing the subsidy every year, which would be the ideal thing, it's going to be the other way around. So you're going to tell some minority parent of a kid at a shitty public school, we're going to give you $6,500 a year voucher. You can use it wherever you want. And they're going to say, but the tuition at the private school I want to send my kid to is $20,000. I can't afford that either. So it's still discriminatory. And so every year there's going to be pressure for the government to ratchet up this subsidy, just like Social Security goes up all the time and these things. And then the private schools are going to have increased demand the more this happens, and they're going to raise their tuition, and it's going to be a spiral upwards, just like college tuition has gone up. And so it's going to end up in a massive increase in the hit the taxpayer like me has to pay. So I think that is one.
There's a danger there. And the lever, and the lever that you invoked that would move it is this idea of egalitarianism and discrimination and all this envy-based nonsense that if we don't root out in our culture, we're just going to die no matter what we do. It's poison. It's poisonous to think that way. And
let me make one other point. So, like Corey DeAngelo, they talk about school choice. We actually have school choice now, right? First of all, America, we happen to be one of the countries where you have the right to homeschool if you want to. You have that absolute right. You also have the right to send your kid to a private school. So parents actually have school choice, and you have the right not to have children that you can't afford to send to private school. So we actually have 4 or 5 different ways of private school choice right now. No one is forced to send their kids to public schools. What the force is forcing me to pay for it.
Sure.
I mean, so this program doesn't help me out unless it does reduce my taxes.
I think it will reduce your taxes. And again, I think we break the back of the teachers' unions. And, both nationally and at your local level, how much weight do they have on all things political that's just in the wrong direction?
Yeah. And, another point I'm going to argue in your favor now, one of the things we always mention, when we mention the what are the worst things the government does, it's the central bank, war, taxation, conscription, maybe the drug war, intellectual property, which is the worst, and government schools. And one of the worst things about government schools is that it indoctrinates these kids. And people say, so you'll point out, well, the reason these kids are so stupid now is because they were indoctrinated by their teachers who were indoctrinated by government schools. And then if you say, well, but some of them went to private schools, it's like, yeah, but their teachers went to public schools. So like it's a pervasive influence. So if you could significantly reduce this propaganda effect from the current model of government funding of educational welfare, I could see that could be a big benefit. But interestingly, in my debate with Corey, he kept resisting calling it educational welfare. And by the way, actually, you're doing. I love Corey. He was a nice guy, but you're doing a way, 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 way better job of presenting a reasonable libertarian case. His argument is for parents because he's trying to get it done legislatively. So he's trying to appeal to voters, right? He's trying to tell the parents why it's a better thing for them.
Right.
He doesn't want to dwell on he doesn't want to use the word educational welfare.
Right. My edge here is I'm talking to you and I speak your language.
And you're a libertarian.
Trying to move
and you're a libertarian.
Right. And he's trying to move the whole country. If he starts talking to him like a libertarian, they're going to be like, who is this nutbag?
I have the freedom to say what I think, which I like. So
yeah, absolutely.
But
I really do think that culture, I forget who it was, but the guy, that says culture is or politics is downstream of culture. I think that's true. And I think if you break the back of the state's propaganda tool when we're all K through 12, I think a lot of incredibly libertarian, positive, anti-statist culture comes out of that.
Okay, you might have me at a point of weakness today where I'm thinking like, if one state tried a very minor experiment tentatively in that direction, I wouldn't necessarily reflexively, instinctively hate it.
Wow, what a concession. Happy birthday to me.
And like I said, some things that I can't hate too much because they piss off the right people. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you always know when
I know
you might be on the right side.
If we had school choice, then if the teachers' unions alone go apoplectic about it, it's kind of somewhat of a win in some way.
Yeah, that's kind of how.
Or maybe you're doing something right. If they hate it, maybe they hate it for a reason.
Yeah, it's similar to how I always felt about Donald Trump. He seemed like just a goofball. Certainly no libertarian in the slightest bit of ways. But look at all those people that hate him. Wait a minute. It tracks a little bit.
Yeah, you got me. Yeah, it does track a little bit. Oh, yeah. Trump is horrible, of course, but if he wins, it's going to be delightful to see the liberal tears. Yeah, but indeed, that's small consolation. I'd rather have a 20% tax cut than that. But if I can't have that, I'll have liberal tears.
Are you telling me a 20% tax cut is on the table?
I'm just saying. I take a 1% tax cut over liberal tears, but I'm not going to get a real tax cut, probably.
No, we're not. We're going to get more central bank lunacy and more wars. That's what we're going to get.
All right. Well, I will say that I can see you have some rationale behind your kind of quasi enthusiasm for some but again, I fear that reality is going to be what I fear. The government's going to fuck it up, do it half-assed and screw it up. And the teachers unions or the equivalent's going to infect the private schools and tuition's going to go up.
You could be right.
And my taxes will.
You could be right. One thing that you have to, one thing that the parents and advocates who push for this have to really watch carefully is that little, whatever it's going to be, clause in the legislation that lets the government define what qualifies as an educational expense. You want to watch that really carefully.
I totally agree with
that's what they're.
But you got to watch it forever because if you
even
if you get a pristine one in one day, next year they're going to try to insert their
for sure. There's dangers, but I mean, we've been screaming about abolishing, let alone the Department of Education, but government schools at the local level too, and it's just getting us nowhere. But I think this is a thing that is popular enough now that we could get it, and I think there's a huge chance that it moves the whole country, the whole planet in a libertarian direction.
Well, I guess maybe the real way to frame the debate is from a libertarian point of view. is it worth risking or trying?
Right.
That's the real
Right.
question, right? Because you can see the possible upsides, but even then, it wouldn't be without costs. So at this point, we're hoping to have a net benefit. Is it worth the risk? That's the question, and I guess I'm more skeptical of that. On the other hand, there must be by this point in America or in some other countries some experiments in this that we could draw lessons from and not just guess, right?
At least partial ones. I doubt you'll find anything pure, but steps in that direction. I said that as libertarians, we should advocate for abolishing all government schools for sure. But then I tried to use a thought experiment in that article. Say you happen to be the deciding vote in some legislature where ESAs were on the table and it was completely split and it was down to you. Do you cast your vote to free these kids from these prisons, or do you stand on principle and say no? And for me, I for sure cast the vote in favor of these school choice measures, assuming the legislation is written the way you and I would approve of it, or Corey would approve of it.
Yes, and that's very well. I think Corey would have a way more lax standard than I would.
I would hope.
I think you and I would have probably a similar standard for what we would think would be a convincing improvement. I don't know what I would do, honestly, in that case. But so what you just said is, I think, not to nitpick, but what you said, that to free these kids. So the kids aren't trapped now, because like I said, the parents do have choice now. They can homeschool, they can send them to private schools, or they can do public schools. So the kids are trapped only because the public schools suck. But
my choice of verb is inexact.
Right, and that's what I'm saying. Right. I'm nitpicking,
but I do believe that the result would be
exactly. That's what I'm saying. I'm sympathized. I'm just saying that argument is not for me. That's not the strongest one, because, like I said in the beginning, I could see why a normie parent, who pays their taxes and they just can only afford and they go there, and you say, "Hey, I'll give you this money. You can do whatever you want with it." I can see why they would prefer that, especially if you explain to them all the benefits of this improvement, right, for their kids. But that's not, again, that appealing to the parents getting a maximum welfare benefit or reducing the shitty welfare benefit. I can see them, but I just to make a libertarian appeal, you have to talk about, like, the other things that you did, which you did. But freeing the kids from prisons, it's like, well, the parents have the right to do that now. They just choose not to. And I'm glad you didn't use the other stupid argument that I really hate, which is that, well, these parents are paying twice.
Yeah.
And I'm like, motherfucker, I'm paying once for your kids. So what's the difference? Why don't I get a bailout? You know what I mean? So don't do that paying twice thing, because I sent my kid to private school and I paid twice, and I don't have a kid in school anymore, and I'm still paying once for your kids. So don't give me this.
I hate it when people look at the oppressive tax system and then start trying to, parse it out, like who's paying more and who's paying less. It's like, no, I would never bring that argument. Well, I'm glad I was able to turn you a little bit.
You've moved me a little bit in your direction. And like I said, originally I was attracted to this idea more for economic reasons than for libertarian ones. But now your libertarian arguments, and that's why I said I wouldn't be too upset if some of these states do this, because maybe it will have some beneficial results and it will piss off the right people. And it's not my highest priority thing. The only reason I did the debate was because Gene Epstein asked me to debate Corey, and I did my best as an advocate and a lawyer to make that case, although it was my real position. But you've moved me. Corey's probably going to watch this. Hey, Corey, who I liked and I enjoyed debating, but maybe he needs to recruit you because you did a good job. Although he doesn't want to recruit libertarians. He wants to recruit parents.
he can't afford to put my voice next to his. It'll turn off too many of the people that he needs.
Well, Adam, I don't usually concede anything, but I'm mulling these things over. Put it that way.
Well, thank you so much. And that's just my best birthday gift this year for sure. And thank you so much for joining me, Stephan. Again, you're the best. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for watching or listening to Haman Nature.